those high rates of testing. That gives us confidence every day that we're capturing all the information we can, that we're seeing not only the number of people that come forward, but also obviously the cases emerge. We had 7 cases of community transmission overnight, all of them linked to the Northern Beaches. 6 have already been confirmed as part of the Avalon cluster. And of those 6, 5 were already in isolation. And a number of those cases were found to be positive very late on in the isolation process, day 10 or day 11, which demonstrates how important it is to stay in isolation the full 14 days if you've been asked to do so. So thank you to those people. Those positive results came up towards the end of their isolation period, which demonstrates how important it is for that full 14 days to be respected. The 7th case is under investigation, but the person did attend the Belrose Hotel, and Dr. Chant will have some further information about that. In relation to the Northern Beaches community, can I thank you again for your patience? I appreciate frustration levels will be increasing as we get closer to New Year's Eve and as the days of stay-at-home increase. We hope to have some clear information to everybody tomorrow, or at the latest the day after, on what New Year's Eve and the next few weeks look like for everybody, including those communities on the Northern Beaches. And I just ask everybody for your patience, but every day that goes past gives us more information and more confidence to make decisions which we think will ease the pressure on communities at this stage. And for Greater Sydney, our message remains the same. Please try and reduce your mobility and your activity. Obviously, everybody is aware of the restrictions that are in place. And as we approach New Year's Eve, can we please remind everybody that unfortunately singing, dancing, speaking loudly are all accelerants for transmitting the virus, and therefore those activities obviously are not allowed, and we ask everybody to please respect that. Again, our heartfelt thanks to everybody who's been working around the clock. Dr. Kerry Chant was telling me how many of the contact tracing team are up. We're up at all hours of the night to try and get out those texts to people to make sure all the close contacts have been identified. And I also want to stress again how deeply grateful we are for the rates of testing. If we continue to keep those rates of testing high, it gives us more confidence to make decisions moving forward. So we really need to keep those testing numbers up. If you have the mildest of symptoms anywhere in New South Wales, please come forward and get tested. And Dr. Chant will also be providing detail on some of the sewage or water sampling testing. We're relieved that coastal communities at this stage are all negative in terms of those water samples, which means we don't believe the virus is active in those areas where a lot of tourists are at the moment. So thank you again to everyone. I'll ask Dr. Chant to give her update and then we'll take some questions. Thank you.
So New South Wales recorded 7 new locally acquired cases of COVID in the past 24 hours to 8 p.m. And of these, 6 cases are linked to the Avalon cluster. 1 case remains under investigation. The cluster now numbers around 122. The case under investigation is a firefighter from the Northern Beaches with links to the Belrose Hotel. And there were 4 new cases were acquired overseas, bringing the total cases in New South Wales to 4,669. There were 23,933 tests reported to the 8 p.m. last night, compared to 39,133 on the previous day. Can I express my gratitude to the community for continuing to come out for testing over the festive season, but I can't stress enough how important it is that anyone with the most minimal of symptoms across the state. We are at a critical stage in our response, and unless we have those high testing rates, it does not give us adequate assurance that we are not missing undetected lines of transmission. Obviously, we supplement this by intelligence from our sewage surveillance, but it is imperative that people continue to get tested. We'll also be asking that people who have been in isolation, particularly at those venues associated with transmission or household contacts, get tested towards the end of their incubation, their 14 days period. And again, that gives us another level of assurance that we're not missing unrecognised disease in the community. So the case we had in the firefighter was locally acquired and under investigation, is that of a resident in the Northern Beaches who had attended that Belrose Hotel. And I think at this point it might be useful if I just go back with a bit of a story around what we know about some of the cases we've had and their linkages to the Belrose Hotel. So you may recall a few days ago I mentioned that there was a young gentleman in his 20s who worked at the Belrose Hotel. that young person had come forward appropriately for testing because of the precautionary approach of him and his family. I can confirm that he has not transmitted to our current awareness to his family, his close contacts, or his work colleagues. But what we're concerned about is understanding how this young man got the disease. So whilst he was tested on the 23rd of December, when we looked and undertook serological testing, so that's a blood test, to get better further understanding of his timing of infection, it indicated that he'd been infected about 2 to 3 weeks ago. And then when we take a history from him as well as his mother, he had a very transient illness associated with a very short period of fever on the 10th of December. So basically he came home from work, a bit tired, and then went to bed, woke up with a bit of a took his temperature, was a bit of fever, and then woke up the next morning and totally fine, no fever. So very transient illness at that time, but he's come back positive. So based on that, we looked. There was also someone else who attended one of the cases, who attended the bottle shop at the Belrose Hotel on the 17th of December. But this young gentleman was not working in any way. He never works in that area and was not the source of that person's infection. We then did workplace contacts around that 17th to look at potential issues, and those work colleagues were negative. Yesterday I called out the fact that we wanted upstream testing, and I'd asked people to come forward that had been at that Belrose Hotel. And then this new case in the fireman actually attended the Belrose Hotel on the 11th of December for 1.5 hours. But can I emphasise that the earlier case, the gentleman in his 20s, did not attend on that day. So we're not looking at the gentleman in his 20s infecting this firefighter. What we're looking at is for the missing link. Who else was present at the Belrose? So what we're actually asking people to do is anyone who was at the Belrose Hotel any time between the 12 to 6 p.m. on the 11th of December, we're asking you to get a test. Irrespective of whether you have symptoms or not, please go out and undertake testing. And then generally, if you've been to the Belrose Hotel and have the most minimal of symptoms, please get a test anytime in December. And even if you historically had an illness that you think in retrospect might have been compatible with COVID, please get a test, and please isolate until you've got that negative test. Now, the reason we're just saying get a test and then you're free to go is because the 11th of December is a while ago, so we would have expected to pick up any transmission in that period of time. In terms of the case, yesterday I indicated about a Bondi case that we were investigating. That's still under investigation. All indications are that this result may be a false positive, but we are convening an expert panel to review all the information around this case to come to a definitive conclusion. And I just again want to thank that case for undertaking testing and assisting us with our investigations. Since 8 p.m. last night, there have been one new case linked to the Rose of Australia Hotel in Erskineville and a household contact of that case. These will be reported in tomorrow's numbers. But again, I'm using this as an illustration why the 14 days is so critical. We are seeing people come forward who develop symptoms that 10 days or so after the exposure, right up to that 14 days. So please stay in the isolation for that 14 days. Please get a test before you leave isolation. In relation to the Sydney to Griffith flight, as we indicated yesterday, a person who flew from the Sydney to Griffith on Monday the 21st of December has since been confirmed as COVID positive. Again, stressing this person flew before they knew they were a close contact of a case and did nothing wrong. There were 28 passengers and 1 flight attendant who flew on the flight, which left Sydney at 2:10 p.m. and arrived at 4:20 in Griffith. All have been contacted. 19 results are negative so far, and with testing on the remainder pending. Again, the 4 million mark is a milestone, but I just again urge everyone to come forward for testing. And also the sewage surveillance, which we've been enhancing over recent months, has been done for a lot of the coastal communities, and to date we have not had any positive detects from those coastal communities. But can I also urge in those coastal communities, please come forward for testing. We can't rely on sewage surveillance alone. We need you to come forward for testing. But we have had a detection in the Warriewood, Hornsby Heights and Brooklyn catchments, and New South Wales Health is aware of recently positive cases in these areas, but again urges local residents to come forward and get tested if they have even the mildest COVID symptoms. Thank you.
Dr. Chart, can you explain something in relation to the Belrose Hotel? Do you think that the person who was the source of the virus in Avalon, the source of the outbreak, gave the virus to this worker at the Belrose Hotel? He is not the source of it. Is that correct?
So we don't know. So what we know is that this young gentleman in his 20s has one of the earliest onset of illnesses in the cluster, confirmed on the basis of serological testing and PCR. This is part of our detective work to look at that upstream and see if we can establish any links. We're obviously doing some work to cross-check whether anyone attended the Belrose and also the RSL. We're also asking the community to come forward for testing to help us and find these missing links. But at the moment, I do not want to speculate. I've presented the information available to us and want to acknowledge the cooperation of the Belrose Hotel and also the community in coming forward for testing.
How can you not know, Dr. Chant, how can you not know where the source of this Avalon cluster was? It's been about 2 weeks now. And you still don't know. Are we ever going to find out the answer?
So we're pursuing a lot of avenues of inquiry. So we have the sequence data on the Avalon virus strain, and we know that it matches most likely of US origins. We know that there was one person who arrived from overseas that was in hotel quarantine that had a close, not absolutely identical, a similar strain, so that's obviously a line of inquiry. You can imagine that we are doing a lot of testing, and sometimes we will never be able to definitively conclude that, because people clear the virus, and if you've cleared the virus, we then are basing it on serological studies, and we can never then check absolutely the virus strains and compare them. When people have very old infection, we sometimes are not able to isolate the virus. So we are working as hard as we can, and I just again want to thank the laboratories who have been sequencing over the weekend and doing all of that hard work in terms of helping us with the serology to pinpoint the source of this investigation. We probably have 10 or 12 line of inquiries. We open up a line of inquiry, we close it down. New information comes to hand, and that's why we're asking the community, anyone who was at the Belrose Hotel for the whole month of December, if you had anything that could in retrospect have been a COVID-like symptoms, come out and get a test.
Can you still detect it this far on down the track? Like if somebody had it early December, they've cleared it, can you still detect that if they came and had a test?
Some people, not everyone, after infection develops serology, but clearly we also know our testing is quite sensitive. So this is not perfect, but testing people who have been in there in December, if they've got a recent infection, we may well pick it up. But also if it allows us through our records to cross-check people that might have been at the Belrose Hotel and then at other venues of interest, we may be able to ask those individuals to assist us with serological collection. So if we find some avenues of inquiry that we want to pursue, can I just again say people have been amazing in cooperating with our investigation.
There's a bit of confusion at the moment on the Northern Beaches. We've seen people sitting in groups of 2, being moved along by police. Aren't people allowed to picnic in groups of 10 outdoors?
Well, we said yesterday that until the 30th of December we will allow, for the southern zone of the Northern Beaches, up to outdoor gatherings of 10, but in the northern zone only 5, and they have to be people from that area. We don't want people moving in and out of those zones. So in relation to outdoor gatherings, we did say that until the 30th of December midnight, we would allow 10 for the southern part of the northern beaches, that's including children, and 5 for the northern part of the northern beaches.
For recreational outdoor.
Yes, yeah.
Premier, New South Wales has always been declared the gold standard when it comes to contact tracing. Do you think that's still the case when we still haven't been able to find patient 0 and this Avalon cluster has exceeded 100?
Well, look, those comments have been made by others, but I'll say the following. I have been blown away by the level of detail that I've been provided as the Premier every day on every case. Of course, there are questions we can't answer because I don't know if anyone on the planet would be able to answer some of those questions. But if you look at the complex way in which our tracers have been able to get to the level of detail, being able to identify the timing that people were at a particular location, the likely chains of transmission. We have a lot of information at our fingertips, which is allowing us to have confidence in the strategy we have. But there are also questions we don't have the answers to, and I think that's okay. We're dealing with a very contagious disease. We're dealing with a population of 8 million people, and you'd expect us to still be solving some of the mystery around the current cluster. But having said that, the detailed information I've received has blown me away, and it's given us confidence to make decisions moving forward.
Are there any pushes?
I'm sorry. Yeah.
Could I ask you, are we concerned that we're dealing with a more virile strain of the virus? Obviously, we've heard reports from overseas that it's much more transmissible. Are we dealing with that here?
Well, Dr. Chan actually gave me an update this morning about that, and we're making investigations about that, but clearly the strain that is most similar to the one we've experienced in the Avalon cluster is associated with the US strain, not the UK strain, which is getting a lot of attention at the moment. So at this stage, the only strain that we've identified in the community is the US associated strain. But clearly our experts here in New South Wales are watching very closely information around the UK strain and also other parts of the world that are detecting a mutation. And that will obviously have implications for potentially the vaccine, but also transmissibility and what that means as to whether or not we need to improve our processes moving forward. Is there anything else you wanted to add to that,
No, I
Dr.
can
Chan?
just say that, perhaps Premier, and I think I addressed this earlier, that genetically the mutations reported in the UK strain are not present in the Avalon cluster strain. So it is of US origin and doesn't have those changes that have been purported to be associated with increased transmissibility.
Have you got the genomic data on the second patient class, the officer, not the nurse, the driver? Have you got the genomic data?
We do. We are working through a recollection also on the first transport driver because there's been a bit of disconnect in the information. And so that results will be available tomorrow morning. I did contact the senior oversighting pathologist just before the press conference and confirmed that that would be available tomorrow, and then we'll provide an update on the results of the genome sequencing of the patient transport drivers at that stage.
So it might not be in relation to the Avalon cluster?
I don't want to speculate at the moment. We are confirming and that the laboratory is rechecking. There are some pieces of information that don't match, and like all good laboratories, when you get any disconnect in the information, there has been a recollection of samples from the patient transport driver. That is being rerun, and we will know that tomorrow. And that may, I don't want to speculate, but that we will be transparent with the results of that information. But I just want to let the lab do their work.
The firefighter that you mentioned today, my understanding is he was told he was negative and he's gone back to work. Can you confirm that he had a false negative?
No, the firefighter is a positive person.
Well, the union is saying that he went and he lived on the northern beaches. He went and had a COVID test. He was told he was negative, so he went to work and he did his shifts at work. He then left, he got sick,
Okay.
He went and got retested and got a positive.
So in terms of the directions allow people to attend critical work from the northern beaches. Obviously he's a firefighter. I can't comment, I haven't got to hand whether he had a negative test, but we were allowing people who had critical work functions to continue to work, provided they had not been to any of the multiplicity of exposure venues, were not a contact of a case.
But the union is saying he had a test, it came back
Okay,
negative,
so-
and he went to work.
Yes, so just remember what I've indicated. So just for the listeners, the question is around again, the importance of when you have one test at one point in time, it just reflects your infectivity at that particular point in time. If you have been exposed, you need to wait the full 14 days. Now, this person would not have been, as far as I'm aware, to any of the exposure venues that were of concern, where we were saying to you, isolate, you are a close contact. He wasn't identified as a close contact. So I can look into that detail. But this goes to the key point, that just because you're a negative at one point in time, you need to get a retest if symptoms develop.
Can you clarify how many cases are linked to Belrose Hotel? So is it just the hotel worker and the firefighter?
So the hotel worker and the firefighter, and then someone did attend just the bottle shop whilst infectious. Again, we don't know. We've got to be careful about when we're indicating crossover. It doesn't mean that they acquired the infection there. But what we know is there is a 20-year-old gentleman who worked at the hotel, had an older infection, an illness on the 10th of December, very transient one that in retrospect may have been signalling as COVID. That's consistent with his blood test that shows when he was diagnosed around the 24th of December that he'd had infection about 2 to 3 weeks ago. On that basis, we have tested his household contacts, his close contacts, and because there was crossover with a gentleman who went to the bottle shop on the 17th, we also tested workplace contacts. That was before Christmas. And then when this firefighter has also attended on the 11th, we are again renewing our calls for wider spread testing around the Belrose to help us find any further links between how this virus got into the Northern Beaches community.
You obviously don't know how it started or got into the Northern Beaches community yet, but given that all of the majority of the positive cases are linked to Avalon or household contacts of the Avalon cluster, and there are so many people in isolation, do you think that you've shut off all potential chains of transmission for this cluster?
I think what we need to see is we need to see the community continue to come out for testing. We need to have the best intelligence to base our decisions on. There are some pleasing numbers in the sense that increasingly people have been in isolation for the full 48 hours prior to them becoming infectious, and so that means that we've blocked those chains of transmission. What we want to understand is, are we missing any undetected chains of transmission in the community? Having those high rates of testing generally help us. We may never find the exact source and the links, but what's most important is we are not missing unrecognised chains of transmission in the community currently, and that's why it is equally as important for everyone across the state to be getting tested for COVID, for everyone across the state to look every day at the new list of venues and check themselves off against having been a casual or a close contact at those venues, and for everyone with the most minimal of symptoms. And then the other thing as a community we can do is continue to take those COVID safe practices. Don't be out and about when you've got any symptoms. Maintain your physical distancing, wearing a mask when you're in indoor environments. These small acts will help us get the best intelligence but prevent further spread of COVID.
Premier, can I just ask?
Sorry.
Yep. I was going to ask, how many unlinked cases do we still have in New South Wales, and how many are outside?
That's the best quick one for the...
Okay, so we've got the person who is in the CBD. So this is a question around unlinked cases, and in terms of unlinked cases, we have one person who is the Bondi person. I've indicated to you we are looking at whether that's a false positive, but again, we take a precautionary approach. It's positive until we have an expert panel to look at that. We've got a gentleman who was in the CBD area, and I've previously said about that Chifley Square MLC area, that circular key area of the CBD, and there were people that were positive at the time, but they didn't actually cross over in a particular venue or point. So that CBD person. There is also a person who works in the southern end of the northern beaches in Manly and commutes into the northern beaches. We are just checking with Opal Card and Transport about whether there was any overlap on any of his bus routes into the northern beaches, whether any infectious cases were travelling at the same time as that individual, and he works in Manly. We are also double checking the lists of people that were his work colleagues to indicate whether there could be other potential sources for him. So he remains under investigation. There's obviously the 20-year-old that I just described that we don't understand where he got his infection, and obviously the firefighter again who lives in the northern end of the northern beaches zone. So he does live in that, but clearly we haven't got a clear link to any venues in that area. And we're raising the issue about the Belrose Hotel and how that may or may not have been involved in the transmission. So I think that's all. There are a few locally acquired cases in the northern end of the northern beaches where we would say they're geographically linked. We know that there were missing people that were infectious and out and about, so we have had a couple of cases from Avalon Beach, Avalon area, one from Palm Beach, that has not specifically, they may have visited some of the venues, but not at the time and place that another positive case. But we do know that causes less concern, because I know that there was likely to be some community unlinked transmission occurring in that northern end of the northern zone.
Dr. Tan, how many of all these cases are actually in hospital or have ended up in hospitals? Any of these in intensive care? Is that a typical estimate?
So the majority, I'd have to get the data. I'm not aware of anyone at this point in intensive care. So we're currently treating 107 COVID cases, none of whom are in intensive care. And most cases, 99%, are being treated in non-acute out-of-hospital care, including return travellers in a special health accommodation.
In regard to the Bronte Beach party premiere, will police be in future finding more people attend gatherings like this, which breach the health orders insofar as with a large gathering of 100 people? Why was only one person fined at that gathering? Will they get more power?
Oh look, that's a matter for police, and if police require anything regarding compliance, I'm sure they'll ask. But at this stage, we're confident that all the settings we have in place are sufficient for what we're dealing with. But if police ever wanted to make changes, I'm sure they'd approach government. But I've not received any approach.
I know we all have to come forward to get tested, but what will you be doing, and what changes will your government be making to make sure that we don't have this happen again, where we can't find where?
Oh well, I can't make any assurances that this won't happen again.
Oh, sorry, but what changes will you be making to make sure it doesn't?
Well, we
happen again?
can't. I mean,
will
this
you
is a
hotel quarantine because it potentially
this is
slipped
a
from there.
This is a very contagious disease, and I don't think any government in any place on the planet can give an assurance that outbreaks won't occur. In fact, I think I've said consistently we should expect outbreaks. When you're welcoming back thousands of Australians back home every week, and think of ourselves if we had a loved one that wanted to come home that was an Australian citizen. When you're welcoming back people, Australians every week, you're going to have to anticipate there'll be outbreaks. And of course, I believe we have a very, very strong system in place. We have all the checks and balances, we have all the audits in place. But when there's a disease that's so contagious, when unfortunately thousands of people are dying from this disease all around the world, I think comparably we've done extremely well, but I can't give an assurance this isn't going to happen again.
But
that would
seeing
be.
As a case has leaked from either hotel quarantine or it's come from somewhere and we don't know, do you think that this should be a learning experience and we should be making some changes and reviewing the way things have been done?
Well, every single experience we have is a learning which you take forward. But sometimes it's not so much the processes that are there, but it only takes one person to forget, or one person to have a lapse in something, or unintentionally do something which then allows the disease to escape and transmit. I mean, that's what we always have to remember. It's extremely, extremely contagious, and it can transfer on surfaces, not just through other means, through aerosol. And so we have to be extremely mindful of that moving forward. And sometimes the best laid plans, the best laid policies don't prevent these outbreaks from occurring, and we should accept that this is the norm until there's a vaccine. And that's why it's really important for all of us, no matter what restrictions or otherwise are in place, to think about what we're doing once we leave the house. You have to assume you have it or the person you're dealing with has it, the social distancing, the hand hygiene, obviously masks in indoor settings at high-risk areas, and most importantly, just the knowledge that you have to be especially safe around those most vulnerable.
On the
Premier,
patient
I have a
transport,
compassionate matter. I have a question on the compassionate matter. Do you think a plebiscite at the next election would be the best way to deal with the issue of voluntary assistance?
No, I don't.
so
Premier,
are you
just
going
quickly
to
on your
recommend that
leadership.
the coalition party room vote down that legislation, or will
Well,
you
there's
contemplate?
there's hypotheticals. There hasn't even been anything presented to Parliament.
You don't-
Premier, just quickly on the Northern Beaches,
Yeah.
recreational activity you said is allowed in groups of 5 or 10 depending on where you are, but what constitutes recreational activity?
Well, look, I'll ask Dr. Chant to comment on that, but we're asking people to apply common sense. We know a lot of people have been confined to their homes for a number of days now. So if you're taking children to a playground or having a small barbecue, but you still have to maintain your social distancing, or playing some sport with 5 or 10 people, but no matter what activity you're undertaking within that environment, you have to still maintain the social distancing, you still have to maintain the hand sanitisation, and you still have to make sure that you're COVID safe. I'll just ask if Dr. Chant wants to add anything to that.
That's correct. We're really saying that outdoor environments and settings are much safer. So having children outside, parents escorting them, things like walking along the beach, playing with your children at playgrounds, having a picnic. We want to keep non-household groups separated as much as possible. So if you are meeting up with them, the children can play, but particularly the adults, can they stay separate? Obviously, if you have the mildest of symptoms, you should be isolating and getting tested. This does not apply to the many thousands and thousands of residents of the northern and southern zone that are currently in isolation. This applies to the remainder to allow them the freedom to go outside and outdoors and enjoy the environment. But as the Premier said, they must do that in COVID-safe way.
Premier, why don't you think
Last question.
the best way to deal with the issue of voluntary assistance dying?
You asked me a question, and I'll just say that my opinion is it's not the best way to do that.
What is the best way to deal with it, Premier?
Look, this is, can I stress, it's not government policy. It's not something that I think we should be looking at this time. But I also appreciate people have very strong views on there. I've made my views known. And also, I'm not going to answer a hypothetical question on something that's not been presented. And I've made my views very clear on that issue.
In terms of New Year's Eve fireworks, you've offered frontline workers front row seats and how that's still going to be.
Well, as I said right at the beginning, we will be evaluating what New Year's Eve looks like, and I hope to be able to say something tomorrow or the day after to the community. But can I stress this, and Dr. Chant stressed it as well, the more testing we have overnight, the better information we have to be able to make those decisions. And can I just stress to the community, if you have the mildest of symptoms, please come forward and get tested. Those high testing rates will give us confidence to give some relief to people for New Year's Eve and beyond, especially for people in the southern part of the Northern Beaches. We're looking very closely at that region, and we want to be able to give some positive news, but we won't be able to do that unless we have those high rates of testing continue. And can I urge everybody to do that? But I hope to say something tomorrow or at the very latest the day after on what New Year's Eve looks like for everybody, but also what the first couple of weeks of January look like for everybody as well. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.